Hello dear students of class 11. Today I am going to take up chapter 2 from your textbook Hornbill. The title is We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together. Now this account is written by Gordon Cook and Ellen East. Students, Gordon Cook was a two-time Canadian Olympic sailor. In this account, he shares his adventurous voyage, the ordeals they faced during the voyage, and how, with their positive attitude, with their optimism, hard work, courage, and determination, they overcame the situation. Okay? Now, see the title. The title is written within inverted commas, suggesting that it is a statement. This statement was spoken by the narrator's 6-year-old son Jonathan. It says, We are not afraid to die if we can all be together. See the maturity, the exemplary courage the small boy shows. He says he is not afraid to face death. He is not afraid to die if he is with his family, if they all are together. It also brings out the unity, the bond, the team spirit in the family. It is a very interesting reading, and now I explain it to you. In July 1976, my wife Mary, son Jonathan 6, daughter Susan 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England to duplicate the round the world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. The narrator says that in the year 1976, in the month of July, his wife, whose name is Mary, his son Jonathan, who was then 6 years old, his daughter Suzanne, who was then 7 years old, and he himself set sail. Set sail meaning started their sea voyage, their sea journey from a place called Plymouth in England. And why did they start this voyage? To duplicate the round the world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. They wanted to duplicate or repeat or copy the round the world voyage that had been made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. Now, who is Captain James Cook? He was a famous British explorer, navigator, and cartographer. Children, cartographer is someone who designs maps. So the narrator was greatly inspired by him, and they wanted to repeat this voyage that had been made by Captain James Cook. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, had dreamt of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer, and for the past 16 years, we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. The narrator said that he had this dream for a very long time, and Mary and he himself, who is a 37-year-old man and he is a businessman by profession, they had dreamt of sailing in the wake of meaning being influenced by, being inspired by the famous explorer. And for the past 16 years, see their passion for this dream. He says that for the past 16 years, they had spent all their leisure time, all their free time, honing their seafaring skills. Now, what is meant by this? Honing their sea skills, honing meaning improving or perfecting the skills that are required during a sea voyage. So they were working on their sea skills, they were trying to enhance their skills, and they were testing their skills in the British waters or in the oceans in England. Our boat, Wave Walker, a 23-meter, 30-ton wooden hulled beauty, had been professionally built, and we had spent months fitting it out and testing it in the roughest weather we could find. The ship, the boat on which they were going to undertake the voyage, the name is Wave Walker. He has given the dimensions. It was a 23-meter long, 30-ton wooden hulled beauty. Wooden hulled meaning the structure of the boat was made up of wood. It was a wooden boat and it was made by the professionals, professionally built. And after it was ready, it was built, They had spent many months adding more attachments and fixtures to the boat and then testing it in the roughest weather they could find so that during the voyage they would not face any problem. So they got it professionally built, they attached more attachments to the boat, and then they tested the boat in the roughest weather they could find in England. The first leg of our planned 3-year, 105,000-kilometer journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. Now, the first leg, meaning the first phase of their planned 3-year tour. They had planned to complete this world voyage in 3 years. The first phase, in which they had already covered 105,000 kilometers, and they had sailed from the west coast of Africa and now reached Cape Town. Till then, the journey passed off quite smoothly and pleasantly. The weather was pleasant and the journey was without any obstacles. It was quite pleasant. There, before heading east, we took on two crewmen, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Segler, to help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the southern Indian Ocean. And then, before turning towards east, they added to their crew. They took two more crew members with them. One was an American, his name was Larry Vigil, and another was a Swedish man, his name was Herb Segler. They took two more experienced captains with them so that it would help them to tackle the world's roughest seas, which they were now going to enter, that is, the southern Indian Ocean. On our second day out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. When they came out of Cape Town on the second day, they started facing strong gales. Now, what are gales? Gales are windstorms. So, they started facing windstorms. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. For the next few weeks, the weather was quite rough. It was stormy. The windstorms were blowing continuously. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming, up to 15 meters, as high as our main mast. Now, the narrator says he was not upset or he was not worried about the gales, about the windstorms, but due to the storm, what happened? The size of the waves was alarming. The waves in the ocean were as high as 15 meters and as high as the main mast of the ship. Now, what is mast? Children, mast is the tall upright pole with which the main sail of the ship is tied. Okay. December 25 found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. By December 25th, they had traveled a distance of 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. Despite atrocious weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with the Christmas tree. Now, despite atrocious weather, atrocious meaning ferocious, horrible weather, unpleasant weather, see the positive attitude of the sailors. Despite the stormy weather, they enjoyed their Christmas. They celebrated the Christmas on board and even had a Christmas tree. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon. Even by New Year, there was no change in the weather, but they thought positively and they thought that the weather would change soon. And it did change for the worse. The narrator says the weather definitely changed as they were thinking, but what happened? Instead of improving, it deteriorated. It became worse. At dawn on January 2, the waves were gigantic. We were sailing with only a small storm jib and were still making 8 knots. On the morning of January 2, the waves were gigantic. Gigantic meaning huge, enormous. The ship was sailing with a small storm jib. Now, what is a storm jib? It is a small sail which is used during a storm. So now they were using the jib which is used during a storm, and the ship was still making 8 knots. Now, what is 8 knots? This is the unit of measurement of speed at which the ship travels. So the ship was sailing at a speed of 8 knots. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless enormous seas rolling towards us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. As the ship was rising to the crest or the top of each wave, from there they could see endless such waves coming towards them. And due to the stormy weather, the screaming of the wind and the spray of the water was hurting their ears. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. The captain, he's a very good sailor, so he used his presence of mind. They knew that the weather was stormy, so they took certain precautions. What did they do? To face the situation, to slow the boat down, to slow down the speed of the boat, what did they do? First, they dropped the storm jib, as already mentioned. They started using the storm sail. Then they lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. They tied what is a heavy mooring rope? It is a thick rope. So they tied a thick rope, made it into a loop, and tied it across the stern. Now, students, stern is the rear end of the ship. The we uh, we do not say back end, it is the rear end of the ship. So they tied the rope there. Then we double lashed everything, went through our life raft drill, attached lifelines, donned oilskins and life jackets, and waited. Then we double lashed everything. They strengthened and protected everything by tying it with ropes. They even tied the lifelines around their body. They practiced their life raft drill. Now, what is a life raft drill? Rafts are inflated boats which are used during emergency situation. So they practiced their drill. They attached lifelines and they put on their oilskins and life jackets and waited for the storm. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. The first indication of impending disaster, impending meaning something that is going to happen. So the first indication of the disaster came in the evening at around 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. What is ominous silence? Menacing, threatening silence. You might have heard the saying, the lull before the storm. So there was this threatening, menacing silence all around. The wind dropped and the sky immediately grew dark. The wind had stopped blowing and suddenly the sky became dark. Then came a growing roar, and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. Then they heard a growing roaring sound, and they saw a huge cloud was moving towards the back of the ship. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I had ever seen. And when it came closer, the narrator was horrified to see that it was not a dark cloud, but it was a huge wave. It was so huge that he had never seen such a huge or enormous wave. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of the other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. The wave was perfectly vertical and it was twice the height of the other waves. That means the earlier he mentioned that the waves were as high as 15 meters. So this was just twice the height. That means almost 30 meters in height. And it was coming with a frightful breaking crest. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave, and for a moment I thought we might ride over it. When the roar came closer, it changed into a thundering sound, and as the ship rose to ride over the wave, for a moment the narrator was hopeful that they might ride over this wave also, and they might cross this wave also. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. But then there was a exploding sound on the deck of the ship. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. A strong current of green and white water started entering the ship. The narrator's head was smashed against the steering wheel, and he was conscious that he was thrown into the water. And then he started sinking in the water. He started drowning in the ocean. I accepted my approaching death, and as I was losing consciousness, I felt quite peaceful. The narrator now knew that he is going to die. He faced death so closely, and he accepted this fact, and slowly he was losing his consciousness, and everything felt peaceful. Unexpectedly, my head popped out of the water. A few meters away, Wave Walker was near capsizing, but surprisingly, just a miracle happened and he regained his consciousness. His head came out of the water and he saw that at some distance, a few meters away, his ship Wave Walker was near capsizing. The ship was sinking. Her masts almost horizontal. The ship had come in horizontal position. Then a wave hurled her upright. My lifeline jerked taut. I grabbed the guardrails and sailed through the air into the wave walker's main boom. Then another strong wave came, and the narrator says that the wave walker came in its original position. It brought back the ship in its normal position. It became upright. My lifeline jerked taut. Lifeline, he is referring to the rope that he had tied around his waist. It was pulled tightly and he came closer to the ship. Then he came back holding the guardrails, that is the railing on the sides. He came back on the ship. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag dolls. Further strong waves were coming and he was thrown around the deck like a rag doll. Now what is a rag doll? It is a doll made up of old clothes. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. The narrator was injured badly. He says his ribs had broken, his mouth was filled with blood and broken teeth. Somehow I found the wheel, lined up the stern for the next wave, and hung on. But in spite of being injured badly, the ship was battered, it was broken. But the narrator, he did not give up. He said he found the wheel, that is the steering wheel, lined up the stern, organized the things, and he waited for the next wave. Children, we will stop here today. I hope it is clear. Thank you for watching the video.